أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We would like to welcome you to our Ramadan webinar series, in which we are focusing on the theme of reviving our leadership legacy, reforming oneself, and restoring society. My name is Dr. Mona Islam, and I'm pleased to be here today with our guest, Dr. Jimmy Jones. We're going to be focusing, inshallah, on how to develop leadership in ourselves, our families, our communities, and our society. And today I'd like to ask Dr. Jones, especially about leadership in society. And as we know, Dr. Jones is a professor of comparative religions and cultures, and he has so much experience with leadership in society. And he also is a faculty at TISA, as well as our executive vice president. He has so much to offer, inshallah, so much insight to offer. Dr. Jones, if I can start by asking you, how can we take Islamic principles of leadership and apply them in contemporary societal contexts?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to thank you and the other folks at TISA, because whatever we do is a collective event. So this Ramadan series is really a part of a collective thinking about of how can we enrich our community during the blessed month of Ramadan. And so we came up with this theme of revive our leadership legacy, reform oneself, restore society. And you've heard from my other colleagues about other parts of this theme. And I am I'm anxious to talk a little bit about how we inculcate Islamic principles into the broader society. I like this theme simply because I don't know about folks who might be looking in, but I usually think of Ramadan as a time of introspection and self-reflection. And I seldom, quite frankly, think of how my being in Ramadan is going to impact the larger society. But if you really sit back and think about it, our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, really would withdraw from the society. And it seems to me, if you study the Sirah, you would understand that he would use that withdrawal to get closer to Allah Ta'ala, which is what we want to do, but then come back and engage whatever situation that he was in at that particular time, whether it's in Mecca or Medina. And in looking at Mecca and Medina, we see our beloved, peace be upon him, impact society in a positive way, whether he was in the minority when it comes to power or when he was in charge. And mashallah, this is the beauty of the way and the model that our Prophet, peace be upon him, gives us, is that it gives us a clear pattern of how we should lead, both when we're in the minority in the broader society and when we're in the majority.
MashaAllah. And, thank you for bringing up, the different situations that we can be in addition to, being in the minority and sometimes being in the majority. There's also the concept of being in a very diverse society. And I want to ask you, how do you think that Islam fosters inclusivity and diversity while addressing the power imbalances experienced by minority groups within society, particularly in leadership positions? Dr. Jones, if you can enlighten us about that.
So if we take what I just said a few moments ago and look at the minority, that is when Muslims were a minority in power and Muslims a majority in power, that from these two positions, your focus should be different. That if I'm a minority in power and I'm trying to protect my rights and the rights of other marginalized people, that's one position. If I'm in power in society and I'm trying to protect the rights of marginalized people, this is a very, very different position. And people need to understand that these two positions call for different perspective and different activities. When I think about the difference between the two, when you're a minority, I think one of the main things that you need to understand is that 9 times out of 10, you are not the only marginalized person or group of persons in that society. You're not alone. And the reality is during the time of our Prophet, peace be upon him, he wasn't. There were people who were outside. It was a tribal society, and there were people who weren't protected. There were people who were from different countries. We know this from looking at the founding community. And so in that sense, he could identify with these people because he was marginalized for one reason, because he was an orphan. Another reason, because he ultimately began preaching in a way that the people in power did not like, right? And this is one of the things that can marginalize you. And the message in that, to me, is twofold. One is that even when you're in a minority, you should find a way to live your faith. And our beloved Prophet, Islam, he did this, of course, and he did it in a way that wouldn't bring the kind of repression to his people that would wipe his people out when they were very weak and they were very small. Right, so that's one thing. So you should be looking out the welfare of other people, and also you should carry yourself in society as a member of the society. And sure, you should no doubt be a Muslim, but you shouldn't be foolhardy and confront people in a way that brings undue pressure on your people when you know it's a situation you can't handle. On the other hand, when you are in charge, this is a very, very heavy situation, because there's a saying, a general saying, that power corrupts. And that many times when we get into authority position, we forget where we came from. Our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, did not do this. Our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, he inked the relationship with the people in what was Yathrib, that became Medina, and he laid out the rights and responsibilities between the Muslims and between the non-Muslims. And sometimes people who live in the United States of America say we should not be involved in community. But when I look at the Prophet's model, and I look at the Qur'an, for instance, many of us read Surah Kahf every Friday, I see in both the Qur'an models of civic engagement that are tailored to the situation that people find themselves in and what Allah Ta'ala has blessed them with. And so we have an obligation, a duty, to protect not only the rights of the Muslims, but it's clear from the Quran and the Sirah that we have an obligation and a duty to protect the rights of people who are marginalized in societies in which we live.
These are very important reminders, Dr. Jones. Thank you so much for that. As we know, when we're dealing with people in a leadership position, there's always going to be conflicts, right? And so I want to ask you how you think a Muslim leader should handle conflicts or challenges within a diverse and modern society, considering Islamic teachings on peace and justice.
Well, I think if we look at it from the way of our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, we ought to understand that in a society, this is something that I'm a revert to Islam. This is something that we talk about in courses like Foundations of Effective Organizational Leadership, that we ought to be good to our neighbors, right? That there's a famous saying that the Prophet, peace be upon him, that Jibril alayhi salam was so insistent that the Prophet should be good to his neighbors that he thought he would have to leave in his will. And this is, as you know, wasiya and will is very, very important in Islam. And so therefore, our neighbors have rights over us, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. If my neighbor is just a neighbor, they have neighborly rights over us. If they're a neighbor and a Muslim, they have rights as a Muslim and a neighbor. And again, some of us forget this when we're living in a non-Muslim society. The reality is, in terms of peace and justice, we are the peacemakers, we're the peace leaders. We're not the troublemakers. We're not the people who would cause confusion in society. We are a religion of justice, and we're a religion of equity. And if you look again at the way the Prophet, peace be upon him, lived his life, this is the way we should live. Unfortunately, I think many of us have come up in societies, two types of society. One I call the post-colonial society, and the other I call the post-Jim Crow society. And what I mean by that many people who were born in other countries and immigrated here are affected by the effects of colonialism in the lands from which they came, which often, because often colonialism is so repressive, that you are always over and against the colonial powers, and you always are mistrustful and want to fight them. And similarly, for me as an African American living here in the United States of America and being a victim of Jim Crow, I grew up with Jim Crow, which is segregation by law in the South. You can grow up and be very, very bitter, right, about this and be over and against anything American. And there are many people who've immigrated here and many people who were born here who are very bitter about the situation. But again, if we looked at the situation with our prophet, peace be upon him, if we look at a surah like Surah Yusuf, alayhi salam, in the Qur'an, and we follow his story, Yusuf's story is a story of betrayal. Betrayal by his family, his brothers, betrayal by people who found him and sold him into slavery, betrayal by people who were supposed to take care of them after he got out of prison, betrayal by people in his, we could call it adopted country, but it's like the African Americans who came here. It was a forced migration. It betrayed. At the end of the day, Yusuf alayhi salam was a primary person in trying to save that society. This is the kind of role model we should look to. And this is the role model that our prophet, peace be upon him, had. No matter what your prior situation, no matter what kind of discrimination your people face, whether in a post-colonial situation or so-called post-racial, it's not post-racial here, situation, you have an obligation. If you read the Qur'an, you have the obligation to be a leader for all humanity. The prophet is a witness for us, and we should be a leader for all humanity. And so when it comes to peace and justice, we should be the leaders in peace and justice.
Very good. Dr. Jones, thank you so much for all this insight. And I think it's valuable to note what sort of, communities we come from, that we are, many of us are from a post-colonial, part of the world. Some of us are from post-Jim Crow, and that is what, that does affect us in our thinking and what we experience. I want to ask you, though, you mentioned that we're here to uphold, social justice and equity and equality. What would you say? What is your advice in how a Muslim leader can effectively address social injustices and inequalities within our community that we live in? Because we still have, so many social injustices and inequalities to deal with.
I think addressing social justice and inequality begins with our relationships, as I said before, with our neighbors, the people that we live with. And I'll take that back because people who've come before me in this series have talked about how you do within the Muslim community. So it's within the Muslim community, within your family. So how can you be a social justice warrior in the community and not be a social justice warrior in your home? It's an unfortunate fact of the matter that some of us who are in leadership positions are excellent social justice warriors outside the home. But if we went home, we'd found that person, whether male or female, because we have men and women who are social justice leaders in our community, are some of the most repressive people when it comes to their families. And so the first thing is that we need to cultivate this in our home, because we understand, there's a famous hadith that says the meaning of which is matters but by intention. If we intend to be a person of goodwill, social justice, it's something across the board. And so our spouses and our families should know us as being just in our dealings with them. Our neighbors should know us this way. And then the larger community should know us this way. I used to be co-chair of the Block Watch in the community in which I live in New Haven, Connecticut. And for many years, and it was out of this notion of being socially just that we joined the Block Watch. And one of the reasons we joined the Block Watch is because there's a serious problem with drugs and gangs in the neighborhood. I still live in the inner city neighborhood. And we felt that it was incumbent upon us to bring our neighbors together, right, for the purpose of fighting gangs and drugs. And I just want to say that even though I live in a, quote, inner city, The reality is that it's a very small number of people who participate in such activities. And that very small number of people can give the whole community a bad reputation. And so what we did, we came together with our neighbors. We talked about how we could do things to make our community stronger. We would have community picnics. We would have cleanups in our community. We would have community activities that were for the purpose of getting out information about healthcare and the like. We weren't. Sometimes people say, "Well, we should do it for dawah purposes." In other words, we should give people Qur'ans and we should call them Islam. And so, to me, one of the most effective forms of dawah as a person in the community is to be a good citizen. And so at the bottom line, what I'm saying, on the one hand, you should be a good family member, and you should cultivate the ideas of being socially just in your family, and therefore, hopefully, your spouse and your children will emulate it. On the other hand, you should be a good citizen. And these go together because in working in Block Watch, I didn't have to shove a Quran in somebody's hand. I had people who were members of the Block Watch that said, "Oh, you walk around to that place every day, and I see you walking." But by the way, it said we sort of thought of it as a community patrol. Those of us who lived in the community, we'd be walking 5 times a day, and that could be a sort of community patrol. So my point is that you're a good family member, and you're a good member of the community. And this is indeed is a form of dawah, of calling people to Islam, simply because people want to emulate what you do.
When you're dealing in the community and society, you are dealing with a lot of different types of people. They have their own values, you have your own values. How would you advise to navigate and balance between upholding your own religious values and respecting the diverse beliefs and practices as a Muslim leader, in a diverse society?
Yeah, so for 30 years, I was on the faculty of a college in New York, Manhattan. It's now called Manhattan University. And there was a habit of my department, who happened to be the World Religious Department. There was a habit of the department of having, before I got there, habit of having the department meeting at a bar up the hill, right? A tavern up the hill. And I said to members of my department is that my understanding of my religion, this may not be everybody's understanding of Islam, is that this is something I shouldn't do if I can avoid it at all costs. I said, you guys, if that's what you want to do, you go and you have a drink together and you have a departmental meeting, you can go ahead and do that, but I would prefer not to do that. I wasn't belligerent about it. I wasn't argumentative about it. I just say that I just feel it's just that my faith asked me, and we're in a religion department after all, my faith, my understanding is that I shouldn't do this. Of course, we moved the meeting to inside the college, but my point is that, again, you don't have to be belligerent about it, is that you live your faith, and you live it in a way that you're kind. It was not confrontational. And, I said, I prefer not to come, so I won't come. I'll read the minutes if you want to hold it there. And so they moved the meeting to inside the college campus. And so, and I can name many situations where things were happening around me that were against my values. And I saw my responsibility as just speaking out about it, at least, and not to participate in it. I used to advise people, because a college campus is a pretty liberal, progressive campus. And there are many things that happen on college campus. For instance, I used to tell young people that college is one of the few places that young men and young women who are not related by blood or marriage live together in such close proximity. And at 18 years old, they're all of a sudden thrown into a situation. Now, I often say this to people, and I don't put Islam on it. It's just a fact of life that most of us don't live in close proximity to young people when we're just, we're in the throes of adolescence, 18 years old, later throes of adolescence. And I talk to young people because I was a first-year advisor, I would talk to young people from that perspective. I wouldn't name it as an Islamic perspective, but a good deal of it was an Islamic perspective. But the beautiful thing about it, Islam, in terms of things that are it has many, many things that benefits the broader society. And I felt that that was an example that you need to understand that this is a stressful time, and that you need to understand that you don't have to succumb to, I would say to the young women in particular, you don't have to succumb to the pressures that are going to be on you when you've never been in this situation before. And so again, what we try to do is be a role model, and we're not confrontational with people. We try to use our values in a positive way to the common good.
That's very good advice, using, wisdom in how you handle these situations, and, trying to make choices that, that align with your own values. Have you ever been in a situation perhaps that you can talk about where, it went against your Islamic beliefs while serving in a leadership position in society? How would you advise handling, a situation like that?
Right. So I think the basic point here is that it's first a contractual one. Islam, when we take a job, right? It's a trust, right? It really is, and we talk about this again in the classroom at the Islamic Center of America, because we want to prepare our students for what they're going to face in the real world. And I say to students that as I'm advising them as they're going out in the real world when they're leaving the seminary, is that you're going to run into jobs wherein they're going to be doing things on the job like drinking, or they're going to be having parties where encouraging the kind of free mixing that many of us feel that is not good. You don't have to participate in it, and B, you don't have to stand on a soapbox and scream against it, but by not participating, and if people ask you for advice, giving people advice that in the broad sense that are for the common good, again, a lot of these issues around modesty, for instance, Islam, one of the core values of Islam is modesty. We've lost in the broader American society, and we're not the better off for it. And there are many, many people who are not Muslims and not even Christians and not even religion who decry this loss of modesty. And by modesty, I don't just mean modesty in dress. And we talk about this in the classroom, that we're not just talking about modesty in dress, we're talking about modesty in speech, modesty in comportment, and modesty in how you deal with people. And that if you want to exercise that core value, you can. But my point is about being contractual, is that when you take a job, you should take a good hard look at that job and see if there's anything in that job that goes against your values between you go. For instance, if the job includes handling alcohol, again, I'm a person who feels that this is prohibited. I mean, maybe there's some people who don't feel this way, but I don't feel. And so you take a good look at that job. So, but once upon taking the job, it's a contract, and that we're the best of communities, right? We're the best of humanity. And when we take a contract, we try to do the best we can in the contract. And that I try to do the best I can without violating the principles of Islam. Again, in a setting like I was, where it's a very progressive, very liberal situation in college, it wasn't easy, but it is doable, because you become known as a person who has certain boundaries about what he will and will not do. And I used to say to people that when you come into a situation where the principles are overwhelmingly seem to be against you, you should always be ready to leave. And this is what I mean by that. That's to say that you know that this principle wasn't built on the same. It's not an Islamic institution, so don't pretend that it is, and don't demand that it act like an Islamic institution, because it wasn't built on Islam. But secondly, you should, young people and people in our classroom at the Islamic Center of America, I advise them to always carry themselves economically in a way that a person can't threaten them. Shaitan threatens you with poverty, the Qur'an says. And so therefore, you should be careful about how you spend your money. You should, for instance, I used to pay my rent. Even when I wasn't making a lot of money, I pay my rent 3 months in advance, 6 months in advance, a year in advance. Why did I do this? And I learned it from a colleague who happened to not be Muslim, but I applied it to Islamic principle. So nobody would ever threaten, because usually your rent is the largest, your living expense is the largest outlay. And I would have that money with having the mindset, if anybody either pushed me to try to do something displeasing to Allah, or was disrespectful or dehumanizing to me, I could just say, hey, I'm not going to do that because that goes against my principles, or I do not have to take disrespect because of money. I mean, because some of us believe that because it's so hard, and these days it's very difficult to live in a society because inflation in the United States. But the reality is the risk comes from Allah Ta'ala, if that's your mindset. And so therefore, but you also tie your camel. And so therefore, you don't spend all of your money, right? When you have a little extra money, you don't just go out and have a party, a loud party. You try to make sure that, and particularly if you have a family, you try to make sure that you provided for them. This is a part of being in leadership in the broader community, because we should be witnesses to all humanity. And so therefore, our leadership extends to how we carry ourselves in a job setting or in a family setting or in a social setting.
Dr. Jones, I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us on behalf of the audience. We have gained so much, and inshallah, we look forward to hearing more from you throughout your classes and throughout all of the wisdom that you spread here at TISA. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
الله ربي والإسلام ديني ومحمدا رسول الله ويقيني